Hey everybody, welcome back to Video Game Esoteric and continuing the series on the MiSTer FPGA DE10 Nano project. More specifically, if you can't tell already, testing the current Sega Saturn core, because you guys have been sending an absolute metric crap ton of comments in asking for games to be tested, so this entire video is viewer requests. And if you have a request for the future that you don't see in this video, leave me a comment down below and I am sure I will get to it. But the Sega Saturn core is shaping up so incredibly well, and these are more games that you request that just seem to work on the core. Before I get too far involved though, do me a huge favor, go down below, hit like and subscribe, and ring that notification bell. Definitely helps us out. And if you feel so inclined and want to support the channel, we got a Patreon link down below as well. But right off the top, we're going to be playing Vampire Savior because you guys always want to see games from Capcom that are fighting games on the current core. And since some stuff doesn't work quite yet, Darkstalkers and Vampire Savior were ones you wanted to see. And the best part is, I can tell you right now, it just seems to 100% work on the core. Now, of course, with a lot of these games, we do have those Capcom CPS cores from Hotego, but sometimes playing the home ports can be a more fun experience because you do get extra modes and features. But this is the perfect time to show a game like this because Vampire Savior has that October spooky season vibe going on in full effect, and it definitely 100% just seems to work on the current core. Now, this is a game that I did own on original hardware, but shockingly, I actually sold my Capcom CPS2 Multi because my MiSTer FPGA had satisfied all my CPS2 needs, and I hadn't taken the board out of the closet for over a year. And the best part is I still own a copy on Sega Saturn, and I definitely won't be selling that one even though it works on the core. But every single map, every single stage, every single graphical effect and sound effect is just here in Vampire Savior. Not only that, but this is in my opinion one of the best fighting games that Capcom ever made, and I do prefer this series over Street Fighter. Leave me a comment down below, tell me I'm wrong, but I actually expect a few people to agree with me. This is just Capcom classic through and through, and it is not Street Fighter. So if you're a little tired of playing Street Fighter games and you haven't checked any of the Darkstalkers or Vampire Savior games out yet, definitely do it after this video. They've got so much charm and so much flair. This train here with a mouth coming out of the side of it is just some of the best art I think Capcom artists ever made. And on the Saturn core right now, again, it just seems to be a perfect experience. And it's really interesting as I test more Capcom games and talk about them on captures, it seems like Capcom's games either 100% work perfectly, or in some games like X-Men vs Street Fighter, they break almost instantaneously. It's just down to different usages of the hardware on Saturn and whether or not that implementation is working correctly or even implemented in the current core. But as far as Vampire Savior is concerned, you can see the ending, you can get a credit scroll, you can play it today whether single player or with friends, and I definitely recommend you do so. Now onto another one that everyone kept asking for a retest on, and thankfully has improved since I last talked about it, is Die Hard Arcade. And in my opinion, this is one of the best 3D beat-em-ups of all time, but if you got a nomination for that category, tell me down below. Now last time we talked about Die Hard Arcade, it was working, but there was a lot of graphical corruption in the actual polygons themselves. They would stretch to infinity and it would start right about here. That has all been patched out in recent cores, and on the current core, you can see this right here instead. Once you picked up the clock or any of the polygons on the walls, they would have this infinity vanishing point issue where they would get stretched into the center of the screen. And yes, I know they're quadrilaterals, not polygons, but I'm going to keep saying polygons. It's just easier for me to get out of my mouth. The only thing that Die Hard Arcade is currently missing on the core as of this voiceover are sound effects. You get music, but you're not going to get a lot of the sound effects in the punches, kicks, and otherwise gunshots. I'm not sure why that is. It must just be something missing in the implementation of the core. Every once in a while, they do seem to try to play, and I've noticed that with some other games as well. You might get the first half a second or second of sound effects or music, but then once you get into the actual gameplay itself, those seem to stop, which is not that big of a deal. It's not one of those things where you're missing the soundtrack, but it is something that wouldn't be 100% accurate compared to real hardware. But as far as the graphics and gameplay and everything else are concerned, this is the Die Hard Arcade that you know and I'm pretty sure love. If anyone doesn't like this game, they can tell me down below and I will convince you in the comments and try to tell you why you were wrong. But I talked about sound effects and music, so go ahead and listen for like 35 seconds, but come back because I got more games to show you. So you can tell that the music 100% works, but there are no sound effects whatsoever. So that's the current status as of the making of this video as far as the sound effects on Die Hard Arcade are concerned. So we're basically like 90% of the way there. The gameplay is golden, all of the performance works, all of the Redbook audio is spooling in. We just don't get any sound effects whatsoever, but honestly, the soundtrack is so fun in this one, it's better to have that than the sound effects. Now keeping on the spooky season theme here, and another game that everyone wanted to see again is Mr. Bones. Now I will say that this game is absolutely hard as nails. Big thanks to Andy D for doing some of the captures this week. He played Mr. Bones, and he had the exact same experience I did as far as the difficulty in the first stage is concerned. But so much of Mr. Bones isn't the actual gameplay, it is the absolutely wild FMVs and over-the-top personality that this game has. It is 100% just something that would happen in the 90s. You're not going to see something like Mr. Bones today, but when it came out back in the day, it was just that over-the-top fun weirdness that we always got in the mid to late 90s. But getting actually into the gameplay of Mr. Bones, this is one of the cruelest first stages in any video game ever. You need to avoid the skeletons and everything they're throwing at you, as well as the bats coming forward. The issue is that they make Mr. Bones run so far to the right of the screen, you can barely see anything that you're actually running into. It is definitely a weird design choice, but if you get past the first stage, this game 100% opens up and does become relatively charming. Just be aware that actually getting by this first stage sometimes feels like pure luck and not pure skill whatsoever. You can memorize it, but the cadence of your jumps and dropping back and forth, Mr. Bones was not messing around. It is here to make you lose, and lose you will. But when you do lose, you get this amazing FMV cutscene of Mr. Bones falling into a black abyss. But again, it's the personality in Mr. Bones that really carries this game. It is not a top tier game. This isn't going to be in any best Sega Saturn games of all time list. It is definitely like a B grade game. But as far as the over the top nature and just sheer absurdity and fun in everything Mr. Bones does, it is an experience that you should play on Sega Saturn. And as far as the current core is concerned, it's also an experience that you can play. That's always the best thing about these videos. I'm showing you games that you can check out, and maybe you missed Mr. Bones back in the day. Tell me down below if you've ever played this or not. I would be curious. I feel like most people know about it from actual lists of weird games on Saturn, but not many people played it. Now, going to full 3D, Croc Legend of the Gobos was on the Sega Saturn, way more known for being a PlayStation 1 game. It was one of the games I used a lot for testing on Robert FPGA Zoom Spass's PlayStation 1 core when that was in development. It's always fun to see cross-platform gaming between PlayStation 1 and Sega Saturn, and for the most part here, Croc seems to work. There's definitely a little bit of weirdness on the ground as far as the textures are concerned, but I would have to go back and actually check a real capture of Croc to see if that's in Sega Saturn hardware, because this game always felt like on both consoles it was being held together with wood screw, spit, and straight up dreams and prayers. It is a classic 90s 3D platformer that was not made by Nintendo or Naughty Dog, which means that it's definitely a little bit janky, and you're going to have a Mike Tyson heavyweight level fight with the camera to get it in the direction you want to go. This is something that if you don't have nostalgia for, you might not love, because the game can be difficult to navigate around control wise, but as far as the performance on Sega Saturn is concerned, it is just working again here today. All of the quads or polygons are drawing correctly to the screen, all of the sound effects and music are working, the controls are exactly as they should be, which is to say not very responsive and very difficult to deal with, but accurate to real hardware. And that's the thing, these are just games from back in the day. Maybe you played them, maybe you didn't, but if you don't remember how they control, you're definitely in for quite the treat. But speaking of treats, the audio, the music, the sound effects, everything, perfect. Go ahead and listen and I'll be right back. track has a really good soundtrack, and here on the current core, if there's anything wrong with that audio whatsoever, my ears cannot pick it up. So if you hear anything, leave me a comment down below. I depend on your guys' eyes and ears to help me fill in the gaps because I watch a lot of footage. Now moving on to another big viewer request is Scale Racer, and this one kind of actually surprises me. I love what this game tries to do visually, being a first-person view cockpit racing 2D sprite scaling game, and in arcades it was very visually impressive. I just never have loved the gameplay of Gale Racer, so tell me down below if you're into it. Don't forget it's also called Radmobile, but we're playing Gale Racer today. This is one of those things. It is such a sight to behold in motion, but when you're actually playing the game, the controls and navigating the game world are one of the hardest things I ever find. Sure, 2D sprite scaling games are always a little bit tricky to get used to. Stuff like Outrun and Outrunners would give you a little bit of a testing in patience, but something like Radmobile here is just way harder because of that cockpit view. But I will say the last time I took a look at this game, there was massive sprite corruption on the borders of the screen. All these buildings that would come up would just be mangled. Now today it looks exactly like it should, but this game always had a very strange vibe to it because sometimes when you're on the road or turns, it seems like you're basically driving into the void, and that still works here. I'm sure it was just down to the fact that as the camera banks, Sega really couldn't figure out how to get graphics to the side of the screen, so it is a very weird visual presentation, but the visual presentation on the Sega Saturn core is matching what it should on real hardware. This is the type of game, maybe you're going to love it, maybe you're going to hate it, but it's definitely an experience that you should check out because it's another game on the current Saturn core that just seems to work, but be prepared for frustration. The oncoming traffic barely gives you any time to avoid it, and the road can be quite narrow, but even things like the headlight visual effect here are working on the current core, and this is just a night and day, no pun intended with headlights, improvement over the last time we showed this, because the sprite corruption made this a pretty ugly experience, but today it is just running. Like I said though, be prepared for frustration. It's like this is the narrowest 3-lane road ever to exist, and once you start banking into corners, it doesn't seem like you can hold the D-pad down hard enough to not crash into things. This is a crashing simulator masquerading as a 2D sprite scaling game. It is fun, but it's definitely not Outrunners. Now another game in the shmup category that you guys keep asking to see is Galactic Attack. I've owned this on Sega Saturn for probably like 16 years or so. I still have my original copy as well as the Japanese version on my shelves. I have played this an absolute metric ton, and I will say right now if there's any issues with this game that aren't on original hardware, I cannot tell whatsoever. The sprites, the visual effects, the control, the music, everything is just a 10 out of 10 as far as the does it work department. The best part with that is that this is also an incredible shmup that you should definitely check out. I love both the top and bottom layer mechanic where you actually have that lock on with a separate button. You can lock onto the lower layer enemies and hit the button so that you send out those ion beams to destroy them. There's so much strategy involved in this game, and it's got one of the best soundtracks I've heard in a shmup. Go ahead and listen, and I'll be right back. Sounds absolutely incredible, but do be aware I have upped the audio volume because this is one of the games that plays a little bit too quiet in the core. Just make sure you turn your audio volume down when you're playing Saturn right now, because the next game might be normal volume and you might end up at maximum volume by mistake. Now if you haven't noticed yet, something has happened in the image, and I'm actually going to let you comment down below and tell me if you see it. For some reason something goes missing once you load into stage 2, and I have noticed that on certain games on the Sega Saturn, loading in can cause issues. It doesn't cause a freeze, it doesn't cause the audio to drop, but if you haven't noticed already, maybe you won't ever notice. That's the fun thing, is it's such a small thing that maybe you're not even going to be able to detect it in the footage. So outside of this one mystery thing that I'm not telling you about, if you want to play Galactic Attack today on the current Saturn core, you can. I've played it, I've seen the credits scroll, and it's definitely worth checking out. But the best game in this testing set is definitely Vampire Savior. If there's anything wrong with this game, I would never notice whatsoever, and that is where the current core is with select games. If there's any deviance from actually real hardware, I don't think 99 out of 100 people would ever be able to tell. Maybe if this is your favorite game of all time and you put thousands of hours in, you might notice one frame of animation that is slightly off, but if you're just a casual to big fan but not the biggest fan in the world of this game, I don't think you'd be able to tell anything that's wrong, because it's very possible nothing is wrong. But that's the current slate of Sega Saturn tests. If you haven't seen a game that you've wanted to see on this video series, leave me a comment down below and I will try to make sure I get to it. Don't forget though, the Saturn is a massive library, so I can't get to everyone's request no matter how hard I try. But if I'm interested in what I see, I definitely like to check it out. But if you want to play these games today, you can 100% do so on the current core. Each and every one of them is going to give you a great experience as far as gameplay is concerned. You're going to have a ton of fun. Short of that, I am done. Go play some Sega Saturn on MiSTer FPGA and have fun doing it. I'll see you guys next time. Bye bye.